What is the scariest movie you have ever watched? The Wrong Man by Alfred Hitchcock. Obviously, movies with serial killers, monsters, blood, and gore are scary. But, in my opinion, this movie is the most frightening because it has none of that. It's about an average Joe minding his own business one night when he's accused of a crime he didn't commit. It could happen to me, to you, to anyone. What happens to his wife is equally frightening and tragic. I think it's one of Hitchcock's best films, better than the ones he's known for like Psycho and Vertigo. He did cameos in his movies, but he decided not to appear in this one. For me it was The Grudge. Most horror movies with ghost infestations have the haunt associated with something. Like with The Ring, she would appear through TVs and water. Other haunts are associated with mirrors and reflective surfaces, some pop up in shadows. But The Grudge had no rules. Shadow across the room, she's there. Dark corner in the ceiling? She's there. Washing your hair in the shower? She can appear behind you and snatch you. Pull up your hoodie? She's in the darkness in your hood. The randomness and pure revenge of the ghost is what got me. Evil Dead Rise. Alyssa Sutherland, who plays the main Deadite Ellie, was absolutely horrifying. She deserves an award. I couldn't stop fearing she'd be in my apartment waiting to pounce when I got up to pee in the middle of the night. I'd look through my bedroom doorway just expecting her to be there. Maybe I'm alone in this opinion, but man, she was frightening. If I ever meet Alyssa Sutherland, I'm shaking her hand and telling her she legitimately terrified me in that role. The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The original Exorcist never really scared me too much. I actually laughed at some parts, but The Exorcism of Emily Rose was fucking terrifying. That movie gave me nightmares for months after I watched it for the first time. I love horror movies and love watching them alone in the dark even more, but I will not touch that movie again with a 10-foot pole unless it's in broad daylight, I'm with other people and it's playing in the background on mute. Guessed, it's a short horror movie on YouTube. I never get actually scared from horror movies, but YouTube always has something for me. Maybe it's just personal taste, but tip search for underrated hidden gems. It's not that terrifying, but more like really creeped me out. It reminds me of nightmares. Also possibly in Michigan 1983, another short horror on YouTube. It's not that scary, at least personally to me, but again it's weird and kinda creepy. I really like the Poughkeepsie tapes. I'm a big fan of true crime and the entire movie is filmed like a documentary. There are a couple of reveals that really instilled the horror in me, not just fear. It's definitely not for everyone and it's usually classified as a disturbing movie, though. I watched it with my boyfriend and he physically squirmed at some of the scenes. Had to suggest some Studio Ghibli to make it up to him. Lamau. The Ring was one of the first movies that genuinely scared me. Then it was The Descent. I think Insidious freaked me out pretty good too. And the first Paranormal Activity. But if I were to watch any of those for the first time nowadays, I'd reckon only The Descent would still get to me. I think the part of it is the claustrophobia and darkness, since those are genuine, common fears. The Ring was one of the first movies that genuinely scared me. Then it was The Descent. I think Insidious freaked me out pretty good too. And the first Paranormal Activity. But if I were to watch any of those for the first time nowadays, I'd reckon only The Descent would still get to me. I think the part of it is the claustrophobia and darkness, since those are genuine, common fears. Zodiac. The supernatural doesn't scare me nearly as much as actual serial killers do. And Fincher lays the perfect atmosphere in the film to terrify me. The idea of enjoying a quiet day by the lake and having a psycho with no intention of allowing you to live just walking up, finding you, and stabbing the shit out of you is far scarier to me than demons or ghosts. This is going to sound dumb, because it's based entirely around my personal experience. Darkness Falls, if I remember correctly, it's about the Tooth Fairy, snatching people from within darkness. I watched this movie when I was like 14 or 15, and then I walked over to a friend's house at 8 o'clock at night. It was dark, it was wooded. I was terrified. I am not really a horror guy and maybe this is not that genre. But if we used Requiem for a Dream as a don't do drugs video and showed it to kids in middle school or so, it would have a dramatic impact. That movie is a rough watch. Falls into the category of great films that are extremely difficult to watch a second time. Seven is another one. Come and see 1985. Full movie is on YouTube for free. This is a movie that I believe everyone should watch at least once. I've seen my fair share of horror movies, many with high ratings. But nothing can compare to the horrors that Come and See shows a viewer. Everything in this movie happened in real life, less than 100 years ago. I thought I was completely immune to being scared by horror movies these days. But I actually got goosebumps watching Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. It genuinely creeped me out. I'm not really even sure what exactly it was, since it's basically just grave encounters in Korean. But something about it really freaked me out. I'm pretty chill with all horror movies, grew up watching them and very much a big fan of the horror genre. Hereditary 2018 is just dread from the get-go, genuinely unsettling. Gerald's Game 2017 with that scene is the only time every hair on my body stood on end and my skin crawled with revulsion. It's a tie right now between Threads and Lake Mungo. Threads because it's just a little too probable. I get nervous when I see a bunch of military planes flying around. I live in a military-heavy area. Lake Mungo because that reveal lives rent-free in my head and scared the shit out of me. A toss-up between this and Odd Fact. It was filmed in a Scottish slate mine. Lovely place to visit. Annihilation the Bear Man the fucking bear. TBH when watched during the day they're okay, but boy, watching them at 1 AM in this morning while it's pissing down wasn't smart for either. I can't remember which I saw first, but I remember either Jeepers Creepers or The Ring were my introduction to scary stuff. For years I pictured either Samara or the demon on a trench coat just hanging around the doorway to my room. After that, scary movies scared me, but not to that degree. The original Japanese Ring and Korean Ju-on. I've worked on set in horror films, so I don't actually get scared watching horror movies since I know how they're done. But a mixture of being Asian and thus familiar with similar myths in the two movies' use of silence freaked me the fuck out. A 1944 film called The Uninvited with Ray Milland. I watched it as a young teen when it was on late night TV. Scared the bejesus out of me. I found it a couple of years ago online and tried to watch it again, thinking I'd just laugh at it. Nope. Had to switch it off long before the end. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, 37-year-old horror fan, and I still had to watch the 2017 It remake over 2 or 3 nights. The tall man from It follows no relation whatsoever to it, also makes me shudder, though the film itself, while I really like it, doesn't rank among the scariest. I'm no fan of horror, but I watched both the Japanese version of The Ring and The Exorcist. I think The Ring takes the cake though. Fortunately and unfortunately for me, my own horror was broken by a complete stranger beside me. She whimpered and grabbed my shirt so hard my sleeve tore. Since people have already said what I would pick, I recently watched Barbarian for the first time. Best jump scares I've had in a long time. Also, I recommend Pulse Cairo. It's a Japanese ghost story and it has the scariest ghost scene I have ever seen. To me it's scarier than The Ring. Scary in a mind-blowing sense would be Interstellar, but mostly because it makes you think about the relativity of time, etc. Scary in a traditional horror sense would be The Strangers because the villains were simply ordinary people who were driven by curiosity and opportunity. The Invisible Man. Gripping and terrifying the whole way through. I could barely sleep for a few days after watching. An evil ex who wants to physically and psychologically torture you without you being able to prove it is so much scarier than any generic sci-fi fantasy monster. Went to the theater to see Hereditary not knowing it would deliver one of the biggest gut punches in any movie I'd ever see. While still recovering afterward, I received a call that one of my close friends had drowned in our river in a boating accident. No joke. Worst night ever. Skeleton Key. The movie was really good and it wasn't like a horrifying, violent, scary horror movie. It was just the idea and the execution and the ending. The fate the main character suffered at the end is literally my biggest fear to this day, and I think about it all the time. Jesus Camp. A true documentary about indoctrination of kids. It's so sad. They brainwash kids. Break them down. Make them cry, then build them up into devoted Christians. It's terrifying because you see it happening and it's real. And you feel powerless to help. Green Inferno. For whatever reason, this movie disturbed me to no end. I hate thinking about it and I hate that I watched. I was a full-grown adult when I watched it and it left me sleepless for days after. I know, not a typical horror, but still. It was disturbing. The Omen, the original one. Not because it is the definitive scary movie, but because I was like 7 when I saw it. The music alone in that movie freaked me out. I think a lot of answers here will be contextualized by the age when people saw their scariest movie. Using a loophole, since what I'm about to say was based on a very popular and scary movie, but Alien Isolation is absolutely terrifying. I've played it up until about where the Sevastopol is falling apart, but I can't play it in long spurts like I can other games. Y'all can make fun of me, but Blair Witch Project really did it for me. Even though it's not poop your pants scary, it is wildly unsettling. The movie was so good at building suspense that you could hear a random twig snap in the woods and it would make you jump. Don't be afraid of the dark in the early 1970s. I was way too young to watch a horror movie like that, but the TV channel played it in the early evening. It traumatized lots of children. 2017 Be Afraid of the Dark 1973 film. Not a single one had really given me nightmares or traumatized or frightened me TBVH, and I have seen hundreds of movies regarding specifically the horror genre. I only fear God. 24 Here, Victory and P's best horror movie of all times for me is Exorcism of Emily Rose, The Descent. I watched it for the first time about 6-ish months ago and was the most stressful experience of my life. The scene where she is having to hang hook her way across the top of the ceiling of the cave to get a rope across to the other side, weary face. No one has ever heard of it. It was a really weird movie called Fantastic Planet or something. Watched it when I was 3. If you also know what I'm talking about, please try to explain what the movie is about so my nightmares could finally stop. Nope. I'm not a horror fan, but a group of friends and I went to see Nope on an IMAX screen. Gordy's rampage, the screams from animals and people, the inside of the alien's belly, and the blood rain were horrifying. But I loved it. The Ring. Mostly because I rented it at the time when you could rent a DVD or a VHS. The DVDs were out at Blockbuster, so I had to rent the VHS. Yeah. And no shit, my phone rang after the movie ended. I was 21 and had nightmares for weeks. I watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the theaters, and at one point you could feel the fear in the theater. It was surreal. I also decided to watch The Ring alone in the middle of the night. The opening scene. I felt raw terror,